books from Marshall Cavendish right now.
Yeah, secretary should say, look, we have all these materials. Who wants to publish? Give me a quote, and if I find your quote acceptable, I will let you do it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe make it open to everybody. Don't limit and discuss with one company.
Sure. Maybe Pearson is another one.
Yeah.
But when once we have the books of ASEAN, maybe in the library, in the school, and we need the people to read it. But how about the situation of the young generation about reading book in each country that they love reading, or we face the same challenge of the same problems in the region that the young generation is lacking of interest in the book or reading the book?
Now, I think the solution is that you cannot be always top down, because you cannot tell young people what to read except in school. But you can be bottom up. You can involve the young people themselves to write their stories, to write their experiences, to have competitions among ASEAN primary students and secondary students, so that they get engaged in creating their own content. You know, I don't think that everything should be librarians or teachers telling the students what to read about ASEAN. Let the students themselves also come up with their ideas too.
Mr.
I think
Kall?
it will work.
Yes, Mr.
Yeah,
Kall?
that's a good idea. Oh, sorry, Mr. Kall.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, Dr. Chan.
That's a good idea, because at the moment also in Singapore, the Scholastic is doing a similar award with the Children Festival. At the time of the Children Festival, they award the best short story. Then this type of awareness will promote the reading. And if you can do similar competition on ASEAN, reading and writing, that's a very good thing, I think.
Competition.
Yep, Mr. Kall?
Okay, I think I agree with Dr. Prasad. Yeah. Reading it should somehow, it's not on top down. It should be also from the children, because as we all know, reading is enjoying and reading for pleasure, and also requiring skill. I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think part of the habit of reading, it came from the early age. When you from your beginning of the day you go to school, you start reading. And this is the solid foundation, building habit of reading. It's not until you reach a certain age or certain grade and then you begin to read. But it should be from the early age, from the early grade. And if we take into this point, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think in ASEAN country, especially like in Cambodian, where I know Cambodian, Laos, and Vietnam, the challenging is children do not have skill, reading skill. We tend to somehow work on habits, promoting habit of reading, make children enjoy reading, but we do not touch part of reading skill, because we think reading skill is a job of the government. Well, at Room to Read, we've been working in Cambodia for almost 10 years. We put in book, we are focused with never touching on reading skill, because we think the reading skill is the job of the Cambodian government. Until later, until the last 2 years, we found that children did not read much because they don't have skill. Although we're providing appropriate reading material to them, but they don't have skill to read. And that's where motivation is not there. When you are not motivated, you are not voluntary to read. Enjoying reading, habit of reading, it's a volunteer reading. And you're not volunteering because you think it's too complicated and you cannot read it. And that's why for the last 2 years, we work with the Ministry of Education, honestly, to change their textbooks, And I'm trying to, because during the first session of the Professor Vitayakorn's, there was a question about the way of Thai learning should be changing a textbook. In Cambodia, so far we're learning by vowel, consonant, blending, yeah? And then you go to words. This was teaching since the early 50, 60, 70 years back, the way they're teaching Khmer. if today we calling pure phonics approach. Yeah, today we call pure phonics approach. But when Cambodia opens to the free market in 1993, there was a lot of experts came and say, no, this is not the way of learning language. It should be whole language approach. And we changed our textbook to whole language approach. You know what? Until 10 years later, we realized this is wrong. Because children who completed high school, they could not reading, they cannot blending, because our script, it was so complicated. You have superscript, you have subscript, you have so many levels of blending. Students do not even recognize special vowel or consonant. And they cannot, when you cannot reading well, you can imagine the quality of education. And that's why, we've been studying a lot. For the last 5 years, World Bank have studied and informed to the government. Government refused. They say, no, we are fine. Until the last 2-3 years, they say, okay, we have problem. So now we're changing the textbook. They, the government, especially those who are the teacher during the 1960s, they want to introduce this kind of phonics approach again, which is learning about half centuries ago. And I was a part of the committee. I say, no, we cannot do that. 50 years ago, 60 years ago, the classroom size was only 20 kids. And you learning morning and afternoons. Today, you have 44 kids, 45 kids, even 50, 60. How the teacher is going to facilitate it? And if you go to Kall Kann for all day, with this phonics, you will never learn it. And that's why we say it is a combination between phonics and whole language approach. And this is a textbook where we're doing now. At first, we introduce children to learning on vowel, consonant, and then introducing words, reading at the same time. And this has been practiced for 2 years, and government have realized that reading has been improving drastically. And we are working with them to changing the second grade textbooks. And at the meantime, we also using another strategy to promoting habit of reading by installing library, make sure children have access to book. I'm trying to call back again when I'm talking about the skill. We also provide material because the teacher, they rely on a textbook. So what we did, we produce more storybook, reading book. It links to the textbook. So we say, okay, if you teach this lessons, this is the book. You could use it as supplementary material. Because if you ask the teacher to do by themselves, at this stage they will say no. It's not mandatory. So what we did, we say, okay, this is the additional material which is linking to the textbooks. Because their learning, their teaching, their achievement is major against the amount of the number of pages in the textbook they have achieved. So I think the habit of reading, like I'm saying, we do a lot of setting up library, we're producing more books for children. We also doing campaigns on reading. We work with the government to produce to set up the reading day, reading events, and also reading contests at the classroom level. And we're trying to make sure we reach the marginal as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kall. And Ms. Nellie, Brunei face the same challenge?
Yeah, I think it's a common problem actually. But in Brunei now there is an initiative of working with the Parent Teachers Association, that's PTA. And they're quite powerful actually, the Parent Teachers Association. So during those meetings, they have seminars, they have workshops with parents. So parents are being educated on the awareness of, excellence in education for the children. So reading comes in as well, selecting of good books, building a family corner for the children in the house. So they even have a list of basic books. Maybe they can, if they can afford it, to buy, to put in the library in the house. So these are little initiatives that is being taken up at the moment, which is, is very interesting and it's very encouraging.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nellie. Before I go to...
Sorry, can I just add that even in an urbanized city like Singapore, we found that there were children who could not read. So I agree totally with Mr. Kall Kann that it is a fundamental issue that we must address. If children cannot read, then all the books and content that you produce is no use. Because first of all, they must have the competency to read. So one of the things that we did was we realized that these children come from homes where the parents also have very low education. They might even be illiterate. So we brought in volunteers called Project Read, where the volunteers would go into the homes and read to the children and teach them to read. So we have about 3,000 to 5,000 volunteers who do this for the low-income households. And these kids never went to a library. They didn't know how to borrow books. They didn't know how to choose books. So these volunteers helped them to pick up reading. The funny thing is that even for mathematics, you need reading. Because the question is like a bus with 30 passengers is traveling at 50 kilometers an hour. You know, so that's the first line of a mathematics question. If you don't understand that, what can you do? You can't do your mathematics. So reading is absolutely fundamental to all your subjects. It's not just your English and your geography or history, but even for science and mathematics. Because a lot of words are being used in mathematics problems today. You need to understand the use of the language. And if the problem is misunderstood, you will get the wrong answer. And if you get the wrong answer, you will get 0. So therefore, we have started to put, because the teachers were saying that these children are getting very poor marks in mathematics and so on. So when you analyze it, it's just that they get into school without having enough competency in reading. So I think before you push out too many books into the market, make sure that your children can read.
Thank you. Before I move to the next question, may I remind the participants that you can ask a question to the speaker by writing in the paper and then send it to staff, and then the staff going to bring to me and then going to ask the speaker. Well, the topic is towards ASEAN citizenship with books and reading, but how do speakers think about the internet to play the role to promote the reading in the region? Dr. Thant?
Yes, this is a very interesting topic. For Myanmar case, we have internet access in most of the major cities, and most of the kids and then also adults use the internet. But as Dr. Prasad said, we have no control over this. Whether they are really reading or they are just using internet games or chatting, that we don't know. So that's one way. Another thing is as I presented yesterday, our country, 70% of the population is in the rural area. So they don't have the access of the internet. So they are relying more on the printed media than the internet. So it may take some time for a country like Myanmar to be relying on the internet at the moment. No?
Yeah. Mr. Kall? Yes.
I think the idea is good to have this internet, but as Dr. Thant mentioned, you know, the access to all this ICT remain very limited, and it is accessible by those elite group, which is they don't need your support either, because they are elite group. They all access to all those things. Our primary target is to those who are in the marginal. I'm not saying the marginal, but the people who are in the rural area, people who are not access to all of this. And they are the one who always manipulates by politicians. They could easily manipulated by politicians. Because, and that's why I think, I agree with Dr. Prasad. We should have, when our topic discussion here is towards the ASEAN citizenship with book and reading, I think we should begin by producing a book simple which is starting, like Dr. Prasad was saying, 2012, you have grade 1 and grade 7. I would say, okay, probably, let's say 2012 is still early. Let's say 2013. Why don't we join together and doing this kind of projects? Yeah, we can start with not the government, we can start probably NGO, we can start probably with civil society to starting doing that by printing a common, simple books for grade 1 and grade 7. Yeah? And of course, using English language as a means, because we have different language, but at least English has been introduced in all ASEAN community, which is, I think, this should be the base for us to start. And I'm concerned because, this ICT, it's very much access to the elite group. Our primary targets here to make habit of reading is to those who are not much access to this kind of thing. And they are the one who really easily manipulate, and they are really, I'm not saying they're the one who making trouble, but when they easily manipulate by the politician, they could also making a lot of trouble. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Prasad, any comment on that?
I agree that there's a large sections of the population who don't have access to internet today. However, I think we should prepare ourselves for the day when everybody will have access to internet, because for sure that in 5 years' time, it will happen, even in a rural area. If you look at many other countries, even poor countries, access to internet is no longer a big issue. Even a large country like India, for example, many of the government services are now provided through the internet. And if you don't have access to internet, you would miss out on many of the benefits. So I would say that you have to prepare yourself for that eventuality. You have to create a love of reading for that small window of time that you have left. Because if you don't create the love of reading, then if the internet comes first, then you have lost the battle. My second point is that whatever you put out on the internet for the ASEAN community, it must be able to be found easily. Because if you put out content that cannot be found, then you don't exist at all. So if I put your organization's name in the search bar and I don't find it, then that organization basically doesn't exist, right? Even though physically it exists and it does a lot of good work. But if you can't find it on the internet, then you are very low down the priority. And